editors, and so on and so forth. Now we'll, inshallah, continue with our discussion. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillahi al-kareem wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. In your notes, it talks about the obligations of the parents first and the obligations of the children second. The reason for this is that the course was actually offered to parents and people who are running families. So we put their obligations first because it pertains to them. But there is no doubt that the right of the parents after the haqq of Allah, from all the makhluk of Allah, the greatest right is that of the parents. وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordained that we worship none other than Him. And after that, the next command is kindness. Kindness and care for our parents. And we cannot overestimate the importance of parents and the importance of the rights of parents. I'm not going to go into too many details, but they're in your notes. The Quran is very clear on this issue. Hadith is very clear on this issue, but I know that many of the brothers that are sitting here are more concerned about upbringing of children. And that's what has brought many of you here. But before I do that, I want to share a little story with you. Imam Suyuti rahimahullah has a book called Al-Khasa'is al-Kubra, which is on the topic of the specialties, the special attributes of the Prophet ﷺ. In this book he mentions a riwayah that once a youngster came to the Prophet ﷺ complaining about his father. He said, "O Prophet of Allah, I'm young and I'm the only one who earns in our family. I live with my father. I'm the one who supports. He does not work. And he wastes all of my money. I earn, I bring, provide. He wastes it all. And now I'm getting very frustrated." The Prophet ﷺ told him that you go and bring your father and I'll speak to both of you in front of one another. And this is the rule. Whenever one party of a dispute comes to you, you never ever listen to them just by themselves. You don't form any conclusions, any judgments, even in your own mind, until you've heard the other side. As the boy goes to call his father, Jibreel alayhi salam descends. And he tells the Prophet ﷺ that this boy is lying. He has hurt his father and he has caused great pain. And his father has internalized this pain. He hasn't said it to anyone else. And the Arabs, as you may have heard, were very eloquent in expressing their emotions. Their emotions would pour out in the form of poetry. So in one of those states of extreme pain and sorrow, all of these couplets came out of his heart. And that's how he expressed his emotions to himself. But he kept it inside. He didn't even utter it on his own lips. Not even his own ears have heard those couplets. So when he comes, ask him what he said within himself, what he said to himself that day. When the father and son arrive, the Prophet ﷺ asks the boy to repeat his claim, his issue. The boy mentions it in front of his father. he asks the father, "Now you speak. What do you have to say?" He said, "O Prophet of Allah, there's no doubt that today and now I am unable to work. And this boy is providing for both of us. But Allah knows that I have not wasted a penny of that earning. And I use that money on what is permissible for me. And I have one sister who also has nobody to take care of her. I spend a little bit on her. If I'm doing something wrong, please tell me." The Prophet ﷺ said, "Tell me about those couplets that you said to yourself that day when your son complained and got upset with you." He said, "Subhanallah." He said, "Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always gives us reasons to strengthen our yaqeen, because I have not uttered those to anyone. And the only way you could know about them is if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had informed you." The Prophet ﷺ said, "Say them to me." So the man started saying these couplets. غَضَوْتُكَ مَوْلُودًا وَمُنْتُكَ يَافِعًا تُعَلُّ بِمَا أَجْنِي عَلَيْكَ وَتَنْهَلُ إِذْ لَيْلَةٌ ضَاقَتْكَ بِالسَّقْمِ لَمْ أَبِتْ لِسَقْمِكَ إِلَّا سَاهِرًا أَتَمَلْمَلُ تخاف الردى نفسي عليك وإنها لتعلم أن الموت وقت مؤجل فلما بلغت السن والغاية التي إليها مدى ما كنت فيك أؤمل جعلت جزائي غلظة وفظاظة كأنك أنت المنعم المتفضل فليتك إذ لم ترع حق أبوتي فعلت كما الجار المصاقب يفعل فأوليتني حق الجوار ولم تكن علي بمال دون مالك تبخل. So this is a father expressing his emotions of pain and hurt and of course disappointment in his son. When I read this poetry for the first time, I was baffled of how to translate it. But at that time, when I was a student, I had this interest in Arabic poetry, and at one point I used to translate Arabic poetry, the poetry of the Sahaba, into English poetry. So I made a broken effort to transmit these same words or similar in the English language. And the English version of this is that when you were just an infant with small hands and tiny feet, I worked so hard to clothe you, provide you food to eat. And even in your adolescence, when you ever had a yearning, the only thing providing you was my hard work and earning. Whenever you fell ill, it was impossible to sleep. I would spend those nights restless and sometimes begin to weep. Sometimes I would panic for fear of unknown harm, although death is preordained and there was no need for alarm. But when you finally grew up and at last became of age, and all my life I'd been waiting for you to reach this stage, you rewarded me with bluntness and words that were too cruel, as if you had been supporting me and I was the ungrateful fool. So if you couldn't be fair to me and could not fulfill my right, you could have at least been nicer like a friendly neighbor might. Then at least you would have been loyal to your neighbor. If your true and loving father you simply could not favor. So if a true and loving son you simply cannot be, then with my very own wealth, don't be stingy, not with me. When the Prophet ﷺ heard the man recite these couplets, he began to cry. Alayhi salatu wasalam. And he grabbed the boy by the front of his shirt and pulled him. And that's when he said those words that are mentioned in hadith. أنت ومالك لأبيك. You and whatever you own all belongs to your father. So this is what our youngsters and the young sons and daughters of today need to think about. And they need to reflect on how they're treating their parents. Sometimes, while the parents are doing everything for them, and the kids have not done anything, they rebel, they show anger, they show aggression, they show impatience, they show ingratitude. None of this is acceptable. And the problem is that it's from huquq al-ibad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't forgive it until the one who we owe it to forgives it. And of all the huquq al-ibad, it is the greatest and the most powerful haqq. So, there is no excuse for rudeness. There is no excuse for being disobedient. There is no excuse for wanting to always have our parents in a compromised position just because we think that they can't do anything about it. So you push them. It's like you're twisting their arm. Well, you can't do anything about it. What are you going to do about it? And you push and push and push, and you get them to do things that they don't want to do, things that are not good for you. People who do this are only hurting and harming themselves. A disobedient son cannot have obedient children. Today you're disobedient to your parents. It's only a matter of time before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows you that, or even worse, in your own children. May Allah save us and protect us. So, the Quran is unequivocal about taking care of them. Allah uses the word ihsan, bil walidaini ihsana. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to be overly kind with our parents, not just deal with them, not just put up with them, not just live with them. So are we fulfilling this command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not? It's something we all need to think about. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us for our shortcomings in this. And may our parents forgive us for our shortcomings in respect to their rights and their dues. Moving on, let's talk a little bit about the parents' duties and the parents' obligation towards their children. And this is especially important because many of us come from a background, an environment that is very different to the environment we're seeing today. We were brought up in a very different way. And we realize, without having to think too much, that there is no way we could do the same thing with our children. People who grew up back home, they know it's a different style of tarbiyah. It's a different level of strictness. There's a different way of admonishing. There's a different culture about it altogether regarding what's acceptable, what's unacceptable. When you step into the North American environment, it's a completely different set of norms. It's a completely different set of rules, even laws, that determine what is acceptable, what is unacceptable. So let's first focus on what we need to do from day one. And if you turn to page 13 in your notes, you'll see a brief summary, a breakdown of the things that parents need to be concerned about. A person has a child. The first duty towards that child is to name that child, to give them a good name. And the reason why I mention this here is that we see an increasing trend by which people want to have what they deem to be unique names, something different, something that no one else has. That by itself is not something wrong. But we go to the extents that we go to fulfill this wish of ours, sometimes it's downright ridiculous. We have Muslims that are naming their children after actors and actresses. Muslims taking names from all kinds of languages in the world, just because it sounds different. Somebody's taking something from Hindi, someone's taking something from Farsi, someone's taking something, and sometimes you don't even know what the name means. It just sounds cool. It sounds different. I know some people who, it's obviously not their fault, but you wonder what their parents were thinking. There's one gentleman, very well educated. He comes to me and said, I had a daughter. I said, MashaAllah. What did you name her? He said, I named her Mantasha. I said, come again? He said, yeah, it's in the Quran. Haven't you read it? I said, oh my goodness. He says, in the Quran, I saw it there, so I took it. So what does Mantasha mean? It's not a name. It's not even a word. It's part of a sentence. Mantasha means who you want. Mantasha, it could be a question, who do you want? Or Mantasha, whoever you want. What are you trying to say? This is not a name. So you take out this broken phrase from this ayat and you make it into a name. But they don't understand. They think it sounds cool, it has a nice ring to it. Alright. I met one gentleman. I try to keep a straight face every time I say this, but it's hard. I asked him his name, he said, my name is Bani Israel. I thought he was joking. That was his actual name. And I'm thinking, what were his parents thinking? Strange. I see people, even in our own community, they have all these names and they don't mean anything. They say, well, we don't know, we saw it on a website, we saw it here. Look, name your children after the pious. Name them after the Anbiya alayhi salam. Name them after the Sahaba. Or take pious meanings and give them a meaning that reflects something good. The Prophet ﷺ, on many occasions, if he saw someone who was named improperly, the Prophet ﷺ would change his name. Somebody had a name which meant, difficult, problematic. He changes his name to a word that meant ease and comfort. He met a couple of guys who were referred to as al-muhanan, the people the two that are disgraced and hated by everyone. He said, no, bal antuma al-mukraman, you are the two honored ones. I'm changing your title from today. You'll find numerous occasions the Prophet ﷺ changed someone's name because it was inappropriate. So be careful in the way you name your child because it does have an effect on the child himself. When it comes to teaching our children, the first thing that they have to learn is who is Allah, who has put us in this world. And a child can comprehend this at a very, very small age. Even before they learn how to speak properly, you can teach them this lesson. They're picking up things. They're always learning from us. And they're learning from what we do, from what we say to each other, as well as what we say to them. If we are constantly remembering Allah, taking the name of Allah, thanking Allah in front of them, when they start speaking, then that's what they're going to say. Their first words are going to be Alhamdulillah, Subhanallah, Allahu Akbar. Because that's what they're hearing all the time. And we teach them, the first thing we teach them is it's Allah who has created you. It's Allah who gives you everything. Allah has given you these belongings, these toys, these possessions. Allah is giving it to you, He is giving it to us. He feeds and sustains and protects all of us. And we learn this from the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions an exemplary father. He's telling us what should a father teach his son. وَإِذْ قَالَ لُقْمَانُ لِابْنِهِ وَهُوَ يَعِظُهُ يَا بُنَيَّ لَا تُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ إِنَّ الشِّرْكَ لَظُلْمٌ عَظِيمٌ. The first teaching of Luqman, the wise, to his son was, oh my son, don't ascribe any partners, don't try to make anyone equal to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because this is the greatest wrong. It is the greatest injustice. That after Allah has done everything for you, you think, or you suppose, or you believe that there is someone other than Allah who has done it for you. Like the biggest insult to a father would be to tell him that you're not my father, someone else's. This is probably the biggest insult. So imagine saying to Allah, who is the actual doer, that no, it's not you, it's someone else. It's the greatest insult to Allah. So teaching our kids Iman and Imaniyat, the basic Imaniyat. And in your notes you'll see a list of things that our children should learn right from the beginning. This has to be the foundation of our child's education. What seeds do we want to plant in their minds and hearts? It's these things right here. The beliefs, the system of beliefs, worships, and basic things of halal and haram. They don't have to be university graduates before they learn what is halal and what is haram. We explain to them. Sometimes they'll go to the store, they'll ask you something. Okay, can I have that? No, you can't have it. Why can't I have it? Because it's haram. What does that mean? Explain to them. It has something that Allah SWT has told us we're not allowed to have. It's that simple, but it's that effective. If you observe discipline in your life and you explain this to them, it's only a matter of time before children will ask you. Like our kids ask us that, is that halal? Can we eat that? At school today they were offering such and such thing, but I didn't eat it because I didn't know if it was halal or not. They're not scholars. They don't have intimate knowledge, but they have a basic concept planted in their minds that there is something called halal, there is something called haram, and these are the general guidelines for halal and haram. You don't have to get into nitty-gritty, detailed stuff. Just the basics and the foundation, but it should be very strong. Manners and conduct. It's never too early to teach our children manners and conduct. In fact, Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi, in his book Al-Adab al-Mufrad, he mentions a narration where it's mentioned that there are certain things that you can get from other people, but adab always comes from the parents. If the parents have adab and they teach the children adab, the children will have adab. What does adab mean? Adab means the appropriate behavior for a circumstance and a situation. What is the correct way to behave in that circumstance? When you're interacting with an elder, what is the correct way to interact with that elder? When you're interacting with a peer, when you're acting with someone who's smaller and younger, when you're interacting with someone who's knowledgeable, interacting with a teacher, whether it's a teacher at school or it's your Quran teacher, what is the proper etiquette for behavior? When it's time to eat, what is the acceptable way of eating and what things are unacceptable? In speech, in play, when you're serious, when you're at school. So etiquette needs to be taught in the home, it needs to be taught at a young age. And teaching etiquette, there is no one single recipe for teaching etiquette. But generally speaking, it's a combination of practical demonstration and verbal explanation. You demonstrate it. If you sit, for example, when it's time to eat, you sit in the sunnah way. And your child asks you, why are you sitting like that? You explain to them, this is the sunnah. They've learned that sunnah. It's that simple. But if we never show it, and then later on, if we're talking about the etiquettes of eating, oh, it's sunnah to sit in that way, the child, sometimes they will just ask us, how come we never sit like that? And sometimes they won't ask, but because we don't do it, they have gotten the message that it's not something important. We can talk to them about using good language and abstaining from bad language, but if they hear us using vulgar language, they're going to say, okay, fine, it's a teaching, but it doesn't have to be implemented. Or, when my parents aren't around, I can do it. Because it makes them mad. That's all. I only have to avoid it because it makes my dad mad or it makes my mom mad. Not because it's something wrong within itself. And in those teachings of Luqman alayhi salam, we find that he's also teaching his child, look, you're not doing good deeds and bad deeds because of me, because I'm watching you. يَا بُنَيَّ إِنَّهَا إِن تَكُ مِثْقَالَ حَبَّةٍ مِّنْ خَرْدَلٍ فَتَكُنْ فِي صَخْرَةٍ أَوْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ أَوْ فِي الْأَرْضِ يَأْتِ بِهَا اللَّهُ. Oh my son, any deed that you do, no matter how secretly you do it, فَتَكُنْ فِي صَخْرَةٍ, you can take that deed and seal it up in some boulder, in some rock where nobody can find it. Take it and hide it inside a mountain. You can take it and hide it somewhere in the stars, on a planet, on the sun, on the moon, where no one can see it. You can take it and bury it under the ground. But no matter how much you try to conceal that act, يَأْتِ بِهَا اللَّهُ, Allah is going to bring that act in front of you on the Day of Judgment. So, to get away from this, that because I'm watching you, you better be careful. No, Allah is watching you all the time. So, creating the awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hearts of our children. And of course, we need to demonstrate it as well. Why don't you do such and such thing? Allah is watching us, even if no one else does. Why can't we just do it at home? Because Allah is watching us at home as well. The life of the Prophet ﷺ, teaching them seerah. This is also something we cannot overestimate. Talks and discussions on seerah, talks and discussions on the events of seerah, the importance of those events, and generally speaking, the life and the sunnahs of the Prophet ﷺ. These discussions need to be held in every single home. Whether it's in an informal way, like when you're sitting around, having your dinner, or in a formal way, where you have a halaqah in your house for the family, where everyone sits together in that halaqah of ta'aleem and they discuss this and they learn it. You're reading from a book, or somebody is going over those things. Whatever the case is, these discussions are absolutely crucial. There are so many youngsters who grow up not knowing the sunnah, not knowing the seerah, not knowing anything, because no one ever taught it, no one ever shared it with them. So it's our duty as parents to make sure we are taking out time and making arrangements for our children to learn these things. And it should be to such a point where even if we miss a sunnah, our children are there to remind us. Now, you miss such and such sunnah, you're supposed to do it that way. The Prophet ﷺ taught us that we should command our children to pray salat when they're 7. And reprimand them, punish them if necessary, if they don't pray by the age of 10. If you want your child to pray at the age of 7, you better start training them from the age of 3 and 4. It will become a habit. And then at the age of 7, you'll not have to pull them by the ear and say, come and pray. It's time for salat. You won't have to do that because it becomes a habit. Those people who pray regularly know that it's just by instinct the child will come and stand beside you and start praying. In their own little way. They'll start copying your actions. So they'll mimic us. So we create the environment, we give them motivation, and we praise them or praise their act that you did something very good, you prayed today. When they're doing it on a voluntary basis, give them encouragement, give them motivation, show them that you're pleased. It will encourage them to do it more and more and more. When that age of 7 comes around, it will just be natural. I remember many years ago, when I had my first daughter, I think she was maybe 1 year old, or close to 2 years old. And it was Ramadan, so I would be reading Quran throughout the day, preparing for Taraweeh and whatnot. So she would sit there listening to me. When I would come after Taraweeh, when I would reach home, she wouldn't let me sleep. She would bring my Quran, and the pillow I'd keep my Quran on. She would bring the Quran, bring that pillow, bring my cap, make me wear it, and make me recite some Quran. Until then, I was not allowed to sleep. It just became her habit that no, every time you come home, you've been reading the Quran, why not now? Doesn't matter how tired I am. She doesn't know, no one's explained anything to her. It's just been done in front of her so regularly that she feels, this is necessary, this should happen. How come it's not happening now? So amal, our own deeds, our own practice, is probably the best teaching mode for our children. But there is one element, one ingredient here that is crucial. It's very, very, very important. Both parents need to be on the same page. Otherwise, if they're learning to pray from one parent and the other parent is not praying or not as regular, they're learning a set of teachings from one parent but the other parent isn't really sticking to them, you have created a conflict in that child's mind and you have put them in a very difficult position whereby they're thinking, which one do I follow? Which one am I supposed to listen to? And because we're human beings, they'll generally go with the one that's easier. The option to not practice is always easier than the option to practice. And because it's a parent who is an authoritative figure in that child's mind, because that parent, that authority has given them that option, they feel it's valid and it's justified. So next time the other parent tells them to do that, they'll say, I don't have to because mama doesn't, or because baba doesn't. It's justified. To them, it's real. That's good enough of a reason. So parents need to decide the tarbiyah of the children together. Sometimes the husband is more religious, sometimes the wife is more religious. Whatever the case is, get the other person on board, set common goals and try to live a life that does not conflict with each other's. Give them a set of teachings that's not constantly being reversed. And sometimes this is what is happening in homes where a teaching is being given, but it's being undone. That same concept is being untaught through another parent. And that is a huge burden to take in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we became the means of ruining the upbringing and the tarbiyah of our own children. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save us. Watching over our children's habits, their worship and their activities outside the house. Before we step outside the house, even within the house, there is a lot that we need to keep an eye on. Because today, with the swipe of a finger, our child has access to the whole world, ad-dunya wa ma fiha. And they have potential access to many good things, many bad things, and many things in between. What their experience with the internet is going to be, we have to be the ones that determine that. So first of all, don't give your children unnecessary access to it. You have a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old child who doesn't need access to the internet. There are many, many other things that they could be doing. There are many other activities they could be participating in. Don't just stick that iPod in their hand or that iPhone or that phone or the tablet and just let them spend all day because it keeps them distracted, keeps them out of your way, you're happy. That's not the way to go. Medical professionals and psychiatrists and educators are getting increasingly worried because the amount of what we call screen time. Screen time is the time your child spends in front of any screen, whether it's a phone or a tablet or a laptop or whatever the case is, anything digital, electronic. The amount that our children, that includes video games, that our children are spending in front of the screen is increasing, and proportionate to that, some of the essential motor skills, essential development at the emotional and intellectual level, it's just not happening. So, of course the children will want to play. They want to play all the time. They want to play for hours. You're in the driver's seat. You have to fix times for it. And sometimes, make them fast. Make them go a day without the screen. If you don't, this is going to become their life. They're going to be so attached to it that is going to govern their lives and not you and not your instructions. And what are they learning through these video games? Just read the research. The effects that video games have on the behavior patterns of children. And with increasingly violent and indecent themes that these video games are portraying, we're seeing the exact same types of behaviors and patterns of behavior in our children. Children are getting increasingly violent. Why? Because, for the last 2 hours, they were blowing up people in this video game. Now they want to do the same thing in real life. They want to take someone's head off. So, that's your responsibility. Read the research, find out the harm. And I'm not even talking about, the actual physical effects it has. If you study the dangers of electromagnetic waves, you do a research on what are electromagnetic waves that all of these devices are releasing, and how it has an effect on us, on our cells, on the functions of our bodies, you will be shocked and amazed. There is a reason why they tell you to turn off your phone when you're on the airplane. What did they say? It has been found to disturb the frequency. Frequency of what? You have some of the most powerful communicating equipment. It can communicate from 30,000 feet above to the ground. It's that powerful of a radio, but it could be disturbed because of your cell phone. Imagine what kind of disturbances it's going to cause in the frequencies of the electrochemical impulses happening in your brain, in your body. Imagine the disruption. It's right beside you. In Europe, as you know, they use a higher voltage and a different kind they use a different kind of frequency, a much stronger frequency for their cell phones and whatnot. So I was reading a research out of Paris where the taxi drivers, a lot of whom are relying on the cell phones for communicating, they used to wear these cargo pants, and cargo pants have these pockets on the side. It's much easier to pull your phone out from there, so they have their phone here all day. In 1 year, there were reports of 2,000 taxi drivers who got cancer in their knee. Just by keeping... So this is real. This is not a joke. And we have our children in close proximity to it. I don't want this to stray into a discussion on, physiological things, but I'm just telling you, use some common sense. Be careful, be safe. This stuff is not safe. To be exposed all the time is not healthy. It's just not good for us. I could go on and on and on. Having a cell phone, having any kind of, wired appliance or digital appliance close to you, close to your head, completely disturbs your sleep. It throws off your pineal gland. It throws off your pituitary gland. It disrupts your functions, lowers the quality of sleep, and on and blah, blah. It goes on and on and on and on. So how much screen time are you giving to your child? Think about it. It's not just fun and games. The other thing is the content. If you are not able to supervise the content that your child has access to, you are not eligible to give your child access to the net. You don't qualify. Because you are not ready to take responsibility for what your child can and cannot view. And it's getting more and more difficult. But it's your responsibility to put parental controls on their devices. On the house computer, on the laptops, on whatever it is you're giving them access to, you have to make sure you're there to protect them from all of those things. Otherwise, the obscene material that is out there is getting so frequent and is getting so common that sometimes you go on perfectly decent sites, perfectly, safe, and sometimes even religious sites, but the ads that they're displaying are just disgusting. The da'wah, the invitation to fisq and fujur and haram is widespread. So we need to ask ourselves, are we ready to protect ourselves from those elements, or are we just going to give into it? If we want to preserve our moral fabric, then we have a serious role to play here. And I cannot stress this enough, because this is one of the greatest means of corrupting the minds and the thinking patterns and the behavior of our children. Giving them unsupervised access, there is no excuse for it, there is no justification for it. You're basically, just giving your child away to the elements that exist out there. SubhanAllah, I was at a meeting recently of educators, and they were talking about bullying, cyberbullying. And they were saying, there was a time when a child would get bullied at school, but when they came home, they were safe. But now, they can be bullied even more at home than they would be at school, just through the net, just through whether it's Facebook or whether it's this, that, and the other thing. So social media. There are a lot of researchers who believe that for young people, for young children, social media is actually anti-social media. Because we're seeing this phenomenon of children who are socially active, very socially active online, on various social media platforms. But when it comes to interacting with real people, they're like dead. They have no communication skills. They have no etiquette. They have no social skills anymore. So all of their social interaction is through their fingers, through their fingertips. And online, you could be anyone. You could be anything. You could create a legend. and make yourself the center of that legend, and there'll be no truth to it at all. So getting our children to interact with real people, with decent people, pious and religious people. And that brings us to the point of seeing who are our kids hanging around. Who are their friends? As long as they're young, it's our responsibility to make sure that we are keeping them in a safe, in a controlled environment whereby they're not just being thrown away. الْمَرْءُ عَلَى دِينِ خَلِيلِهِ فَلْيَنْظُرْ أَحَدُكُمْ مَنْ يُخَالِلُ. A person is on the deen, on the way of his friend. So you should be careful who you befriend. We keep them with good, pious children, decent children, they're going to stay pious, they're going to stay decent. Keep them with kids who are misbehaved, with due respect to the parents of those children. It's fine. We respect those parents. They might be our relatives. They might be very good people. But the fact is, are we ready to throw our children away? The TV, aside from the internet, the TV is another problem. Because the content on even family shows, so-called family shows, is getting more and more vulgar, more and more indecent, more and more immodest. The themes, the conversations, the discussions, the subjects are just, you can see the moral deterioration happening right in front of you. And if we are not prepared to make sure our children are not being corrupted by this kind of stuff, then we're not prepared to raise our children in this century and in this country. We're just not. So the parents must take a more active role. We know people are busy. We know everyone is busy. But this is our capital. This is our principle. This is our future. We just cannot afford to throw it away. And creating a strong Islamic family, or creating a strong future Muslim generation, it all happens at the home. If we aren't ready to take care of them at home, there are many other avenues and channels that are ready to take care of them in their own way. When they grow up, getting them married is everyone's concern. People think about it years and years and years in advance. In this matter, I would just like to suggest one thing, that let us try to simplify this process, and make it as easy and painless as possible. Because due to certain cultural elements, this process has become so complicated, difficult, that we have made it hard for our children to get married. And we have made it easy for them to turn towards haram. So a reversal has to take place here, to create a society, a culture, a community where it becomes easier to get married and more, increasingly more difficult to commit haram. This should be one of our basic goals as a community, to create a society built on modesty. And one of the ways that it will happen is you have to let go of some of the cultural elements that hamper these things. We're going to have to let go of some of our own tastes and start giving more importance to deen, more importance to piety, and more importance to making sure that our child is not in a situation, because of some cultural thing, our child is not in a situation where they can be exposed to haram, or in the situation where they feel that they have to commit haram. Equal treatment of children, it's a command of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One Sahabi, Nu'man ibn Bashir radiallahu anhu, mentioned to the Prophet ﷺ that he gifted something to one of his children. The Prophet ﷺ asked him, did you give something like that to all of them? He said, no, just this one. He said, no, you can't do that. When you give to your children, you give equally. The same thing applies to someone who is distributing their estate in their own life. They want all of their estate to be distributed, so there's no fighting afterwards and whatnot. How do you determine the shares between children? Everyone gets an equal share, irrespective of whether they are male or female. If you're distributing your inheritance, your estate in your life, everyone gets an equal share. If it's distributed after you die, distribution takes place then, it will be distributed as per the proportions decreed in the Quran. Because whatever you distribute in your lifetime, it's a gift. You're gifting it. Sometimes unequal treatment of the children results in serious psychological issues in the child that is being undermined or forgotten or ignored. So we need to keep that in mind. Spending on our children according to our capacity. Most people love to spend on their children. They earn so that they can spend on their children. They earn so that their children can have a good life and all of those things. But sometimes you see the opposite. So there is a fine line between spending on them and overspending on them. So spending on them means we spend according to our capacity, according to whatever Allah has given us, we spend. But there is a difference between that and just giving them every single thing that they want or they desire or they ask for. There's a difference. You as a parent need to be wise enough to know at what point am I spoiling my child and at what point am I just giving them something that they need. There is nothing wrong with giving them things as incentives or promising to give them things as incentives. There's nothing wrong with that. But to just give away things and give and give and give, subhanAllah, you're seeing an increasing number of kids who are just always dissatisfied even though they have everything. And they're always complaining. So this is something that we have to tackle, it's something we have to address. Another thing, which I briefly mentioned before, but I want to go into it in a little bit more detail. We have to become practical examples for our children. I mentioned it in the context of sunnahs, I mentioned it in the context of a couple of other things. But overall, we need to become more practical examples for our children. Because the fact is, there is a serious shortage of practical examples for our children. If we don't become the models, there's many other models for them to take. There's any number of people in the entertainment industry that they could take as their models. There are any number of people in the sports industries that they could take as models. And with those models, they follow the lifestyle that comes. So, always being a positive role model, trying our best to keep on bettering ourselves. Nobody is perfect. Everybody is at a different position in their deen. That's something we just have to accept. We're all at different levels. But as long as we're all trying, and believe me, children are wonderful observers. They are so observant. They know when we're trying to do something. We might not be the perfect Muslim today, but as long as we're trying, our children will see the effort, even if we're not saying it. They will see the effort we're trying to put in, and they will understand that, okay, maybe my mother or my father is not doing things at that level, but that's what they want to be like. That's their wish. That's their dream. And sometimes vocalize it. Sometimes share it with them. That I want to be like that. I want to be like this Sahabi. I want to be like that Sahabi. I want to be like the Prophet ﷺ in this aspect. I want to do things the way he did them. And that's what I'm trying to do. Worldly objectives, worldly goals, everyone has them. And to some extent, there is no harm. But when the world becomes our objective, and worldly things become our goal, now we're going to run into some serious problems. Because the Prophet ﷺ tells us, as is in the hadith of Muslim Ahmad, that a person who makes akhirah his goal and his objective, مَنْ جَعْلَ هُمُومَهُ هَمًّا وَاحِدًا هَمَّ الْآخِرَةِ كَفَاهُ اللَّهُ هَمَّ دُنْيَاهُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will suffice him for all the worries of dunya. If you make akhirah your greater concern, Allah will suffice you the concerns, the small and minor concerns of this dunya. But if a person makes dunya their ultimate concern, then what happens? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala scatters his affairs. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes him have to work twice as hard for those same things that he could have gotten easily. And even then he is never content. So making akhirah, setting spiritual goals with our families, spiritual goals with our children. And there is nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong with taking our children on trips, journeys that are going to educate them about deen, inspire them to become better Muslims, show them the history of Islam, take them to productive places. Till when are we going to just keep taking our children to Disneyland and places like that? Imaginary places. Just imaginary. It's all in the mind. You go to a place that doesn't really exist. Concepts that don't really exist. Instead, substitute those things. We don't want people to become good Muslims and then become so strict that life becomes devoid of fun, devoid of enjoyment, because that is not going to be a memorable life for our children. We want our children to have memorable lives. We want them to have enjoyable lives. Being a good Muslim doesn't mean you take out all happiness from your life, all joy from your life. No. In fact, you will find that to be quite counterproductive. No, we don't celebrate Christmas. No, we don't do this. No, we don't do this. Of course we don't. But do you have something that you are doing? Or is this all dry? It's just salat and siyam and masjid and that's it. If that's all you're going to give them, they're not going to hang around for too long. They'll hang around as long as you make them, and they're going to say, well, we need to live a little bit. We need to enjoy it. So do have that time with your family where you're enjoying, you're having fun. They feel that they're getting something. Other kids are going here and there and doing this on their vacations, and you're just sitting at home because, no, we're good practicing Muslims. We don't do any of that. No, Islam doesn't stop you from spending time with your family. Islam doesn't stop you from going and traveling. Spend money on them. Make them have a good time. Make them feel that you are devoted to having them enjoy life, but in a halal way. In a way that's going to be beneficial. In a way that's not going to throw money away. Take them for Umrah. Take them to Muslim countries. Take them to places of history. Brother Ammar mentioned many times that I want you to talk about your journey that you just took. Just a few months ago, actually, just in December, I undertook a trip where I went to a whole bunch of countries. Muslim countries. It was spectacular. There was so much to learn, so much to see, and you're connecting with the history of 1400 years. You visited the maqamat of so many prophets, so many Sahaba radiallahu anhu. And we went to those places that we've been reading about in history all our lives. Alhamdulillah, we went to Bayt al-Maqdis and we saw the land of the prophets. We went to Al-Khalil and saw the maqam of Ibrahim alayhi salam and his family, where he and so many other prophets are buried. We went to the maqam of Yunus alayhi salam. Allahu Akbar. Those places that we read about in the Quran, those stories that we read about of the prophets, they went here, then they went there, then this happened. You're actually there, you're seeing it happen in front of your own eyes. You can imagine it happened because you're there. Take them to places like this. Went to Turkey, subhanAllah. So much history, so much beautiful Islamic history. So much inspiration. And you'll enjoy yourself. There's so many things to do there. So it's not just about making them pray and making them fast. Show them the world. Show them who we are. Show them Islam's contribution to civilization, Islam's contribution to the world. Show them the big, beautiful world Allah has created for us. قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانْظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِ. Allah says, go and see. Travel in the world and see what were the end results of the people before you. The good results of those who did good, the bad results of those who did bad. We've been hearing about the story of Ashab al-Kahf all our lives. Go and see the cave of Ashab al-Kahf yourself. You'll understand what happened, the Quran describes this cave. It's a geographic location, it's a place that the Quran describes, it opens it up. You go there and the whole thing comes, it all makes sense. This is how it happened. This is where it happened. So there's a lot that we can do. Constructive and instructive activities that we can do with our families that will not only help us bond better, but they'll be educational and they'll be fun and enjoyable as well. There are a lot of things we can do like that. And even here in America, there's so many activities you can do. They're going to be productive and they're going to be enjoyable. So this also needs to be kept in mind as a part of the agenda. We cannot just cut out things from our lives and then not have anything to replace it. Some people, what they start doing is they're just mimicking non-Muslim activities and putting a different label on it. You don't have to mimic anybody. There are enough genuine things you can do that are completely Islamic, they comply with the teachings of Islam, and inshallah, it will be a source and a means of your family growing closer together, growing in your awareness of deen and in your awareness of dunya as well. So with these words, I will conclude this talk. There are a lot of other things we could talk about. There's some of the things I mentioned in your notes that I haven't brought up. But our time is fairly limited today. And I hope that this does not serve as, it was not meant to serve as a complete course on the Islamic family life. This was just to serve as some insights, some general guidelines, and some hints and clues that I hope will be beneficial for all of us in building a stronger and more functional and more devoted family to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. How much time do we have till Asr?
So, I was thinking that we do questions and we raise around 50 minutes.
Okay, so the brother is suggesting that we can do the Q&A now, before Asr, so that everyone can go out, and we'll delay Asr by just a few minutes, maybe 10-15 minutes, and then you can depart after that.